now for the award-winning #1 local talk show in Northeast Pennsylvania, The Sam Lesante Show. Now here's your host, Sam Lesante.
What a beautiful lesson to be learned, folks, on a book that is called The American and American Night, and the person who is featured in this book is the life of Colonel John W. Ripley. Well, what do we know about this book? Well, folks, the show today is going to tell you about a person who is extraordinary, a person that we can learn so much from, and I wish this show would be seen by everyone in the country because it instills a lot of great values. Now, the book is called An American Night, and the author is here today. His name is Norman Fulkerson, and he is going to tell us why he wrote this book. We're going to show you some pictures and also a little video, hopefully, of the funeral of this particular person, but it's amazing. And Norman, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you are a member of the American Society for the Defense of Traditional Family and Property, correct?
Yes, sir.
What is that organization?
We exist as an organization to fight against the moral crisis in society, and we do that through educational means. So we have a bi-monthly magazine called Crusade. We do conferences around the country. We have a national conference every year at our headquarters located in a little town of Spring Grove, Pennsylvania. And I've been working with your association for almost 30 years now.
It's amazing we have to have a society that says for the defense of family, traditional family and property. We now have to have an organization to let the world know how so important traditional family values are. But God willing, we'll move ahead. The book, okay, and Andy, if you want to just put the picture up here, it's a fabulous book. It's called An American Night, as you see it, folks, and the life of Colonel John Ripley. Let me just give you an example. I'm going to give you some highlights of what he was for and what he was against. But before you draw conclusions about what I'm going to say, and before some of you women start getting nervous, there's a lot to be said about what I'm going to say. So he as far as moral courage, Colonel Ripley testified against allowing women in combat and homosexuals in the military, okay? And he also testified against women in services academics, which he argued for the training men to be warriors. The issue of sexual abuse in the military is a good issue to illustrate one of the consequences of integrating women with men in the military. We're seeing this happening now. Now, we're going to explain, folks, what he meant by this before we jump to conclusions. Now, let's talk about the book, Norman, okay? How did you meet the person? What inspired you to read the book, and what's in the book?
Well, the way I met Colonel Ripley originally, he was a very good friend of the organization that I work with, the American TFP, Tradition, Family, and Property. And we first came into contact with Colonel Ripley when we published a book on nobility. It's actually a very interesting book. It was a compilation of the teachings of Pope Pius XII. They were actually a series of addresses that he gave to the Roman patriciate and nobility. And over the course of many years, he developed a doctrine regarding the role, the essential role, the crucial role of good leaders in society. So the founder of the association, Professor Plinio Correa de Oliveira, he always loved these teachings because he realized this role, this crucial role of leaders in society. And he always wanted to put them together with commentaries in the form of a book, which he did. It was his dying work. He died in 1995. And we had this wonderful launching of this book in the United States at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. It was a grand event. We had 400 or 500 people attending. And we had a number of panels of people explaining the book, the concepts of the book. And we had a military panel, and on that panel was Admiral Moore, we had General William Weiss, and we had Colonel Ripley. And Colonel Ripley was the big draw because he is a legendary Marine. He received the Navy Cross in Vietnam. We can speak a little bit more about that later. But he was a person that received many awards, and he is a legendary Marine that Marines put him on the same level as Chesty Puller and Dan Daly. So it was through the association, Tradition, Family, and Property, that I first came to know Colonel Ripley. And then what happened over the years, I stayed in touch with Colonel Ripley. We have a boys' boarding school called the St. Louis de Montfort Academy, which is actually located about an hour north of Harrisburg, actually not too far from Hazleton here. And I would take students from our academy down to meet him, and of course, in the presence of Colonel Ripley, I mean, you're in the presence of a legend, a hero, so it was a very special thing. And all of this led up to the point where I conceived the idea of writing a book about him.
In writing the book, to give us some highlights, because the book is extremely interesting. I did not read the entire book, but I read excerpts from this book and found it very interesting about a person who was a true American, a true soldier, and also a very person who had divine faith and believed in what he did and lived it with his family. And I think that's very important, where I'm thinking that people who read the book will get some lesson out of this. Your thinking of writing the book was why? What did he do that inspired you enough? Okay, you touched a little bit about this, but be more specific with our audience here.
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a question I get asked a lot. And really what motivated me to write his book was not so much what he did on the battlefield, but what he did off the battlefield. Because Colonel Ripley, people that know him, he's very well known in the Marine Corps, especially among the Vietnam War generation. He's known for blowing up the bridge at Dong Ha and earning the Navy Cross and what have you. But I think really what distinguishes the man, it's really the high point in my book, are the testimonies that he gave regarding those hot button issues, which you made a reference to at the top of the show. Those are the things I think distinguish him, the greatness of the man, if you will. And it was really that which inspired me to do it. Actually, I consider the writing of this book to be perhaps the greatest grace of my life. I received this inspiration a year before Colonel Ripley died to write the book, because there had not, as of that point, there had not been a biography about the man. And I felt that he deserved a biography, a story about his life, but specifically explaining the war, the cultural war that he waged in society. But unfortunately, I dragged my feet on it and didn't end up doing it because I'd never written a book before. I'd written many articles. I write for our magazine Crusade, I write for our website, but I'd never tackled a book. But I had this inspiration. Well, he ended up dying prematurely at 69 years of age, and that nagging question came back. Why didn't you write his life? And that's when I jumped on board to write it, because I went to his funeral. Actually, I think you're going to show maybe clips of his funeral later. It was one of the most beautiful things that I've ever witnessed. We actually had some of our members of our association there videotaping it. They put together a very beautiful video.
I know we're jumping ahead, but being that you're talking about the funeral, okay, and we come back after break, we'll talk about different things about why he felt women should be in the military. But let's talk about that funeral, because as you're talking, I'm hopefully we'll be able to get this some of the video and show the people what kind of honor this was. Explain the funeral a little bit.
What was amazing, it was one of those, the way I describe it, it was almost like sensory overload. It was so beautiful. And there were people in the Marine Corps that told me that he received a funeral that is only reserved for flag officers. So they pulled out all the stops, the 21-gun salute. They had actually a flyover by Harrier jump jets, and I think that was a kind of a tribute of his brother Mike. His brother Michael was also a very distinguished Marine who died test flying the Harrier jump jet. They had a flyover with that. They had, just the whole ceremony was extremely beautiful. They had a cortege from the chapel at the Naval Academy, where his funeral took place, to his final resting place. They had the Commandant of the Marine Corps at that time, General Conway, gave a eulogy. They had Medal of Honor recipients in the audience, and it was just a beautiful event.
I found it interesting. The Marines use 6 pallbearers.
6 pallbearers. And
when they carry them at chest level.
At chest level.
At his funeral, they carried it at chin level.
I don't know. No,
This is what I read in the book.
The Marine Corps body bearers, they distinguish themselves for carrying it at waist level, as opposed to the other services which carry it lower. And they are known for being extremely strong. They're huge men.
Yeah.
But they also do something very beautiful. Before they lower the coffin into the ground, as a kind of a final salute, they will raise the coffin up, as can be seen in the video.
Okay. All right, folks, I'm talking to the author of this book. It's called An American Night. How apropos for the season that we're in right now, the life of Colonel John Ripley. But the fact that this man instilled values in society, particularly with his family, he says perhaps the most valuable lesson John Ripley would instill in his children was the importance of practicing the faith. And I've said this many times, folks, whether you're Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, etc., if you don't have a faith, you're lost. Stay with us. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to the Sam Lesante Show for 24/7, SSPTV.com. My email is sam@ssptv.com. Thank you so much for watching us in the respective areas that we're in. My guest today is Norman Fulkerson. He is the author of the book An American Night. Folks, you can get this book on theamericannight.org, or you could also get it on Amazon, okay? Now, folks, I said in the beginning, okay, about Colonel Ripley, I want to correct myself here. I said he testified against women in service academies, which he argued are not for training, are for training men to be warriors. He also testified against allowing women in combat. And so let's explain that, because right away people will think he was sexist, okay, which he wasn't, far from it. What was the reason for that?
Well, first of all, let me say that my book is the only place in print where you will find Colonel Ripley's full testimony in their entirety on those issues. And I felt that I had to put that in there so people would not think I was taking the man out of context. Now, if you read those full testimonies, you will see that he was not a misogynist. Him taking that position was not because he wanted women as a footstool. But on the contrary, Colonel Ripley was, as I narrate in my book, an Americanite. So he did not want women as a footstool, but he wanted them on a pedestal. That's why I devoted a chapter of my book to his wife, Malene. He treated Malene like a queen within the family, according to his own children. So the thing is that his position regarding women in combat was not because he wanted them to be inferior, but because he did not feel it was a place for them. It was against their nature. So what made Colonel Ripley's testimony unique on that subject, and it's something you hear no one speak about, he did not address the issue of being against women in combat from the point of view of women's capability. There are certain weapon systems that women, because of their physical limitations, cannot do. He did not argue it just from that point of view. He did argue that point of view, but he went much higher. He was against having women in combat because of womanhood and femininity, his desire to defend those things, and what we in Western cultures have come to appreciate as the graceful conduct of women. So by arguing it from that point of view, he raised the bar high, and he, as it were, covered himself in case those other arguments fell. So for example, let's say a woman can't do certain things physically. Well, a woman could come along and prove you wrong. Okay, well, if that happens, then it still stands that the whole argument of womanhood and femininity, it goes against the nature of women, which is more to nurture and to help and to sustain. We don't want our women in battle, according to Colonel Ripley, because of that reason. We want to defend womanhood and femininity. Well,
you see, and of course, those where you come with the family values, but you have some feminists out there who have their agendas. And the agenda would be, don't interfere with my rights, indicating that you are respecting them more so than what you think you're respecting them.
Well, the key thing you said here is my rights.
Yeah.
Colonel Ripley argued that both the issue of women in combat and homosexuals in the military are argued from the point of view of my rights. It's about self-aggrandizement. And he said, in the military, you don't have rights. You check those at the door. The minute you start talking about my rights, you put the unit in jeopardy, in harm. It hurts unit cohesion.
I want to show some pictures from your book and just briefly explain to the viewers what they're looking at with Colonel Ripley. And where we see the first
Yes,
picture.
this is the Colonel Ripley's family. In the back there, actually Colonel Ripley is sitting in the lap of his grandmother there on my left. And then you have his mother on the far right with the other children. And then in the back row was his brother. This is a picture of Colonel Ripley as a boy.
Yeah, I wanted to
dressed in
show that
naval.
because even when he was a little kid, he dressed as a sailor, and there he is standing as a soldier there, you know.
Exactly.
Now this is interesting.
This is a picture of his father, Bud. He's the second from the left, from my left. I don't know what the viewers are saying.
Yeah, it is left.
And this was when he was at the Naval Academy. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it through the Naval Academy because he missed the boat, which I narrate in my book, which was a great sadness for him and what drove him to send his boy, John, to encourage him to go to the Naval Academy.
And I guess he was proud of, excuse me, this is another picture.
Yeah, this is a great photo of Bud with the legendary Chesty Puller. He was a huge fan of Chesty Puller. Chesty Puller is a great Marine who received 5 Navy Crosses during his lifetime.
And then we move on to, of course, this one here.
This is him receiving a decoration. I'm not really certain. I think it's when he received his Silver Star. His father
for bravery.
For bravery. His father, Bud, is to his right, and his brother, Mike Ripley.
Then we move on to
This is him and his brother,
the Naval Academy.
Mike. Yes, this
Michael.
is him.
Michael passed away, and of course here he is here again.
This is with his niece on his right and his nephew.
And then of course we move to the person.
And this is one of his best friends, Mickey Runyon, with his nephew, Clement Brock.
And here's a poor man who was killed in a helicopter crash on the left-hand side. And now we come to...
and this is a very proud picture of Bud Ripley with his 3 sons. He was very proud of them. You have George Ripley, who earned the rank of a general, Mike Ripley, and then Colonel John Ripley.
Then we move on to, of course, the wedding.
This was his wedding at St. Jude's Catholic Church in Radford, Virginia. They had the cross swords there that him and Malene walked underneath.
Here's what he said, folks, at that wedding. He said, quote, "I have never been, nor will I ever be unfaithful to my wife." That's what he said at that wedding. And then we move on to the other picture, which is another great picture.
Yeah, this is a picture of him and his wife with their oldest son, Stephen. And I think this picture was taken while he was in England.
British, yes, it was the British Royal Marines with the...
This is actually a great picture, him receiving the Navy Cross at the evening parade at the 8th and I Barracks in Washington, D.C. before a huge audience.
And that was the Secretary of Navy,
Secretary
John
of the
Warner.
Navy.
And we move on to his beautiful wife, of course.
And this is his wife on that same evening.
And then we move on to...
And this is actually a great photo. This is him with Colonel Gerald Turley, who gave Colonel Ripley the order to blow the Dong Ha Bridge, for which he earned the Navy Cross. And I think this was very short time before that feat occurred.
This was March 25th, 1972.
Exactly.
That was taken. And then we, of course, we have some other additional pictures here with
This is
his
him
commander.
in Vietnam.
Yeah. They were known as the Ripley Raiders, folks. And then we move, of course, on to this particular picture. Now, this picture here was in Life magazine, according to what it is. And this is this was taken after he had blown the Dong Ha Bridge, right?
No. This was a separate incident. Well, yes, it was
Yes,
after the
yeah.
Dong Ha
It was
Bridge, but
taken
the battle,
after, yeah.
the battle continued, and you can't see them off to the left. There are Viet Cong shooting at them.
Yeah. It's, here, folks, it's in the book, it says, in spite of having almost nothing to eat for days, he mustered the energy to chase down this vehicle so that the wounded Marines would not be left far behind, which is, again, shows about his heroship. Go on.
This is a picture, just a picture of him with some of his friends. The gentleman on the right is from Radford, Virginia. I'm forgetting his name now. He's a lawyer. And the man on his right was his uncle.
We move on, of course, now here. I think you're involved here, right?
Yes, this is a picture of Colonel Ripley and I, a much younger version of me. at the launching of the Book of Nobility, which was a very, very grand event. That's the first time I actually had the chance to meet Colonel Ripley.
And here's a nice picture of Colonel Ripley. The next picture, I would assume. Oh, no, excuse me.
The funeral.
The funeral, I'm sorry. And this, again, was an amazing funeral, folks. And there you have a solitary Marine paying his final respects beside the coffin of Colonel Marine, November 7th, 2008. Folks, I'm talking to Norman Fulkerson, who is the author of this book, An American Night, as you're seeing it right there. You can get the book on AmericanNight.org or on Amazon. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back, folks. Thank you for staying with us. I'm Sam Lesante. We're talking to Norman Fulkerson, who is the author of The American Night, folks. It's a book about the life of Colonel John W. Ripley, certainly a fabulous person, and what a great lesson we can learn from reading this book. Speaking about the book, Norman, tell me, when I read it, well, first of all, why should I read this book, and what should we get from this book?
Well, I think you should read because I think we all see there's a dearth of true leaders in society. But the main thing I want people to come away with is that Colonel Ripley showed physical courage and moral courage. Very few people get the chance to exhibit physical courage, especially on the level that Colonel Ripley did, but all of us can exemplify moral courage by taking on the cultural revolution that we see all around us. If Colonel Ripley were alive today, I can assure you that he would be speaking out, taking a position on the issues of today, like homosexual marriage. So the main lesson we can learn is that he is a man that we can follow, that we can look up to, and also exemplify moral courage as he did in his life.
How do we, in our country today, as we see this country in such desperate desire for faith, okay, and where the mainstream media just continues to erode the families, and we're being lied to constantly, and as long as some people have their SUVs and they're living comfortably, in other words, they don't need God until a disaster happens, what do we do? It's a tough battle we're facing today, Norman.
What we do, I think, we do what Colonel Ripley did. When he blew up the Dong Ha Bridge, for which he earned the Navy Cross, he was being shot at by 30,000 troops, 200 enemy tanks, and in the midst of that, he had gone days without eating, very little sleep, very little water. His strength was fading, and it was then that he relied on God's help, and he started saying, "Jesus, Mary, get me there," as he climbed underneath that bridge. So we can follow his lesson by not only practicing our faith in times of peace, but especially so in times of war when we have bombs going off all around us.
So why does society have to be slapped in the face very hard before we realize that we have to have this faith?
It's unfortunate, but it's then when you reach the bottom, like for example the prodigal son did, when you're eating of the husk of swine, it's then unfortunately that many people will turn around, but we need to do that before.
Norman, thank you so much, and good luck with the American Society for the Defense of Traditional Family and Property. Folks, you realize we have to have an organization to be the defense of traditional family values. The book is An American Night. It's the story about Colonel John Ripley. It's an interesting book. I read a lot of excerpts from it. I intend to read the entire book. Remember SSPTV.com. You can watch this show anytime, and your responses at sam@ssptv.com. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.